Perhaps folks online can help me with the sound check. Can you hear me okay? Great, thanks for that. Let's settle in for our evening of practice and discussion. Doing our refuge chant to begin. It's there in the chat for those of you online. People, if you need it here in the room, there's some copies up front. Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dhammāṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammāṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sanghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatyampi Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatyampi Dhammāṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatyampi Sanghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Taking your time to settle in. And we'll be moving through the first 8 instructions at a faster pace tonight. So remember that this guided meditation and the complexity, the amount of information it's a kind of training that we're doing, not what it should look like necessarily when you're practicing at home, but just an training exercise in learning the map that the Buddha thought would be helpful for us. So the first encouragement, as you might remember in the discourse, and how practitioners is mindfulness of breathing in and out of great fruit and great benefit when cultivated and made much of. Here practitioners, having gone to the wilderness, a foot of a tree or an empty building, one sits down with legs crossed, body erect, establishing mindfulness to the forefront. And always attentive, one breathes in with awareness, and one breathes out with awareness. So that's the setup. Let's just take some time, keeping it really simple. It's not so much about doing the breathing, of course, as much as it is in establishing mindfulness to the fore. There can be that simple realization that breathing in is being known, is being felt. Breathing out is being known and felt. In that sense, the mind, the heart is already sensitive to this natural process of breathing in and out. And the first more specific instruction the Buddha gives is just asking us to keep the breath in mind with enough interest, persistence, that there can be a sense that it's a longer, more gross breath, or it's a shorter, more refined breath. Whether we're observing the inhalation or the exhalation, we're just tracking the ordinary quality of the in or out breath with enough continuity, enough interest to observe this natural settling and refining of the breathing process. But it's not about trying to make anything happen. It's really observing a natural process of the breath and the mind, the body, the heart becoming more settled. So what does it feel like as the breath becomes or reflects this settledness of the body, heart, and mind? And the settledness simply arises because we're keeping in mind the breathing process, and in so doing, letting go of whatever else the mind would be attending to. Really learning this art of devotion, persistence, keeping the breath in mind without having to control it. It's really that effort of not forgetting. And no need to be concerned if your subjective experience feels awkward, the breath feels contrived. Just let the body do its job, breathing in, breathing out, whatever that might feel or look like. Really trust this natural process of breathing, however it is. And of course, naturally begin to notice the qualities of seclusion as there's more continuity, less forgetfulness. We need some real confidence that there's no harm in asking the mind to keep the breath in mind. And it doesn't really matter how bad we are at this, how untrained the mind might be, because if we persist with this kind but committed attitude, then the mind will gain skill, being intimate without being tight about it. How to use this wholesome interest to keep this ordinary process of breathing in and breathing out in mind. And remember, as part of that, just naturally comprehending if this particular in-breath or out-breath is more of a gross, longer breath or more of a refined, shorter breath. And that's just a support for interest. And even if the breath becomes so refined, doesn't feel like much is happening, then we practice being interested in what's really refined and nondescript. We notice this simple cause and effect, tracking the breath in this simple way supports the settling of the mind and body and the breath, of course, naturally. Next instruction. One trains oneself breathing in, experiencing the whole body, Breathing out, experiencing the whole body. Still secluded, settled. But as we feel that relatively refined breathing in and breathing out, just sensing how the whole body is right here already. We don't have to go looking for it, or we don't even need to direct the attention somewhere. It's all here and now. And here and elsewhere, you can always use a meditative word or phrase if that's useful, such as experiencing the whole body, or even the words whole body. Everything belongs. Really sense, if you can, this inclusive awareness as you breathe in, this inclusive awareness of the body as you breathe out. Nothing's left out. Really learning the art of receptivity here with this instruction. Receiving the body as we breathe in. This wholehearted receiving of the body as we breathe out. It's almost as if we'd say to a loved one, I'm really here for you. It's as if we're experiencing that kind of loyalty or committedness as we breathe in to the whole body. And then again, as we breathe out with the whole body, I'm really here. The knowing mind, the sensitive heart is really here, right with the body. And when you begin to feel some calming, some embodied well-being because of this ongoing inclusive presence with the whole body, then just make that switch, training the mind to experience that calming of the body, that embodied well-being as you breathe in and as you breathe out, just keeping that calming, that well-being in mind with each inhalation and exhalation. And you might notice old habits of the attention going to where there's pain in the body. But remember, the Buddha's asking us to train the mind to notice a sense of calm and well-being in the body. through the duration of in breath, and then through the duration of the out breath. Not where there's pain, but where there's calm and well-being in the body. So many of us are creating a new habit. And learning how to really trust this healing, the mind opening and including and appreciating its capacity to be all-inclusive with the body, not to be judgmental, not to be reactive. It's really a kind yes to the body with each inhalation and exhalation. And the body, in a sense, responds with a sense of calm and well-being. And shifting now to the second tetrad, second set of 4 instruction. One trains oneself, breathing in, experiencing joy. Breathing out, training oneself to keep joy in mind. This light, buoyant interest, joyfulness of the heart. The sense of everything happening on its own, and the heart delighting in that activity without so much friction. Like a bright, warm smile. Just the flow of conditions of the heart and mind unfolding. So as we're breathing in, just sensing that quality of mystery of how everything is happening, alive, letting things be. Same with each exhalation. Instead of the usual perception of things being fixed, heavy, burdensome, it's just the opposite. Keeping in mind this light and unburdened quality of the mind and heart as we breathe in, as we breathe out. And remember, you can use a little reminder, so you could repeat the word joy in a tender, inviting way as you breathe in and as you breathe out, if that helps. We're not forcing anything, but we are trying to keep something in mind. And some people find it helpful to have this, even just the idea of a smile, or just the beginnings of a smile. It's a kind of counter-programming for all of our habits of thinking, believing things are heavy and difficult. And that's just the truth. And we can stand back from the joy, just appreciating it, but standing back and sensing this happiness, this pleasure or ease of the heart, kind of contentedness of the heart. So the Buddha asks us to train the mind while breathing in, to keep this ease, this pleasure of ease in mind. And as we breathe out, keeping this pleasure of ease of the heart in mind. Just do the best you can. We're never really losing the rhythm of breathing in and out. In a way, we rely on it to keep the mind here and now in the present. So useful to do this training. Again, it's a counter-programming where we normally have the habit to look for threats. Now we're specifically training ourselves, doing the best we can to keep ease of the heart, that inner pleasure, as if the heart is melting in a very pleasurable way, relaxing with contentment and ease, feeling at home right in the middle. And that ease of the heart, the word is sukha, really has that sense of the heart, body, mind being held. No need to go anywhere, no need to become anybody, because the heart's feeling content. just being. Can we keep that pleasure in mind as we breathe in and as we breathe out? And with the sense of inner pleasure, sukha, now we can observe the ordinary activity of the mind, which is probably relatively quiet. Any feelings that come and go, any perceptions and thoughts. But the ease of the heart really gives our mind dispassion. So as we observe the activity of the mind, there's just a lot of space of non-reactivity, just thoughts, just perceptions and feelings coming and going. So nice not to have to control or judge the thinking process. And for some of us, this is our first clearer taste of dispassion. The mind that's not seeking anything. So whatever thinking, whatever mental activity there is, it's just due to the force of habit. It's not really invested with the self trying to get something or become someone. So in that way, the mind isn't entangled with the mental activity. It has dispassion. Leading onward naturally to more quietude. So this next instruction, one trains oneself breathing in, calming the mind. One trains oneself breathing out, calming the mind. But it isn't so much that you or I or calming the mind, as much as we're noticing. Wisdom is noticing the quieting of the mind, naturally, organically. The mind is resting in itself, in a sense. So one trains oneself now, breathing in, experiencing the space of the mind. Not the activity, but the space of the mind itself. One trains oneself while breathing out, experiencing the mind. Just appreciating the qualities of the mind relatively empty of activity. Pay no attention to the activity, just sense intuitively just the space here and now. Keep it in mind as best you can. Very appropriate to appreciate without reifying or getting attached, but still appreciating the stillness, the silence, the relative peacefulness. This heart, this mind is empty of so much. And that's what makes it so beautiful, worthy of our attention, our not forgetting. So the next 3 steps really come together. We're experiencing the mind, we're gladdening it, appreciating it, and then we're concentrating it or stilling it. All of this is really just about keeping the mind in mind, keeping the space of the heart, the mind in mind. Not trying to do too much. It's mostly about learning how to rest and trust. And the more we rest and trust, the more the subtle ways of interference and subtle habits of selfing, taking things personally, just will fall away. Which leads to the 4th of these instructions in the 3rd tetrad. One trains oneself breathing in, releasing or liberating the mind. Same as you breathe out. It's not so much doing anything as it is just allowing this natural process of shedding what's unneeded and extra. Allowing it to drop away. Take some time. Move the body. If you had a lot of stillness, grieving the loss maybe of some of that stillness as you begin to move. Notice any attachment. Really good to be with everyone tonight. Week 6 of our Buddhist Studies class this fall on the Buddhist teachings on mindfulness of breathing, which really is one of the more, probably the most specific meditative map that the Buddha offered during his 45 years of teaching. And you can see we get into pretty subtle territory with this third tetrad now that we're exploring together. And in the beginning when we're tracking just the breathing in and breathing out, it really can feel like a personal challenge, like not to take the off-ramps and think about whatever the mind is inclined to think about, but really stick with the meditation object. But by the time we get to the third tetrad, whenever we're practicing and with that kind of a mind and that kind of territory of the mind, then it's really much less about a meditator meditating and more about trusting a natural process, like where the mind is keeping the space of the knowing mind, the space of the present moment, keeping that in mind. And as it keeps it in mind, anything extra is seen as extra and falls away. That shedding, that dropping away, it isn't like we're kind of shaking dirt off. Something like that. Oh, selfing. Yeah. So it's really about learning how to rest or learning how to abide. Trusting something that's worthy of that kind of trust. And that experiencing the mind, gladdening the mind, concentrating the mind, those first 3 steps, instructions of the third set of 4 instructions, the third tetrad, they're really the same instruction. We're just keeping the space, the nature of the heart, the nature of the mind, not the activity of the mind, nor the activity of the body, but the space here and now. This is what we call in Buddhism the mind. This is the mind, not the activity that, our thoughts, that's, the activity of my mind, and the sights and sounds and sensations and the smells and tastes, that's the activity of my body. But all of that activity of body and mind, which we worked with in the first 2 tetrads, are happening here in the mind, or being known here in the mind. And it's not our habit to attend to something subtle like that, but it can be, because our mind is trainable. We can train the mind to be interested in something subtle, like the space of the mind. Not whether we're doing a good job at it or not, because that's activity of the mind. Any judgments, any evaluations, even remembering the instructions. So any thinking, any mental activity would be, if it's helpful, if it's skillful, would be in the service of keeping the space of the mind, appreciating, gladdening that. So this is like a deeper pleasure. It's really the pleasure, a deeper taste of the pleasure of non-doing. That, and all of the kind of egoic or wrong view constructs that are behind that self-centered doing. It's just the shedding of that already, just to have because we're coming from a place of mental quietude. Mind is pretty quiet, mental activity is pretty chilled out. And then we're realizing, intuiting, oh yeah, this is the nature of the knowing mind, the space of the mind, the empty. Because what's really, when we talk about resting or abiding, really, to do that, it's really about the shedding. Like we can't really rest if there's some doing going on. And it's really about the identification. Because we can intuit the space of the present moment, and we can keep that in mind, then attention doesn't have to go to activity, identifying with some activity. And when it doesn't identify with activity, then that activity is seen as extra. And it's just this more subtle version of what happened in the second tetrad, where we, relying on that pleasure of that ease, wisdom could observe the activity of the mind without being identified with the pleasure that comes with some thought, or the pain that comes with another perception, or it just sees it as mental activity. And that allows it to basically not be fed. In the email I sent to everybody today, I added, because Venerable Analayo had shared, I'm realizing the link to the book isn't working. I don't know what happened. It used to work, but I couldn't find it. But it was originally shared publicly, the PDF, and I have it. So I made a copy of the chapter on this third tetrad, which is included in the email. And he has, I think, a useful simile. So step 5, where the Buddha is asking us to train in remembering joy, or recognizing joy as we breathe in and out. He likens in the simile to a rushing stream. There's a lot of activity, but there's something very alive and free in how that river or that stream is just flowing and flowing and flowing unceasingly. In that sense that whatever the present moment is, it knows what it's doing, and it can just keep moving, can keep buzzing the life of the body and the mind. I don't have to hold the whole thing together or make something happen. And then the shift, like we stand back from that joy and observe, and it's like the shift of that river coming into a big lake, and it's still moving, but now it's like has a different texture as it comes in the river. Some of you have seen some of these racing rivers coming into Lake Superior, and it's like 30 feet up, it's a torrent, and 30 feet into the lake, it's not much of anything. It's something, but it's not much of anything. And probably not much further out, it's hardly anything at all. When whatever that torrent was really merges with the immensity of the lake, that's this gladdening, this second step of the third tetrad. Experiencing the mind, gladdening the mind, or it's really the pleasure of knowing the mind. So it's not different than knowing the mind, it's just like what comes with knowing the mind. There's a more profound pleasure that comes with it. And that knowing that pleasure helps us recognize how much it is empty, how much is not there, or how much is not the mind, wisdom doesn't need to attend to. So the silence, the stillness, the space, and that it's empty of so much. Empty of ill will, empty of doing, empty of selfing. And it's keeping all of that in mind that allows the nth degree of interference, of selfing, of identifying with even the quiet stillness. When all of that is dropped, that's the fourth step, which is the releasing or the liberating of the mind. And depending, it might be for some meditators dropping into jhana. And jhana, remember, is just a state of absorption. I mean, generally it's characterized, jhana, as a mind that is free of even the more subtle aspects of the hindrances. So even subtle wanting, or subtle not wanting, or subtle dullness, or subtle restlessness, or subtle doubt, none of that. But another way that jhana, the deeper absorptions, states of concentration are described are in terms of the 5 jhanic factors. So this is something the wisdom can just sense. It can be helpful actually when you're working at this level of the 3rd tetrad to just get a sense of that, how the mind, it's vitaka, this application of the mind. It's like the mind is all in. It's really, it's not like dissipated. It's just the opposite of a dissipated mind. And it's related to this word, usually gets translated as application of mind. And then vichara, the second jhanic factor, is that sustained application of mind. So the mind's all in, and the mind continues to be all in. There's no wavering. And then that leads to a deeper level of the sukha, that's the gladdening there. Deeper level than what we experience at step 6. Now we're at step 7, 8, 9, 10, right? And then that leads to ekagata. This is the 5th. Oh, I missed piti. Yeah, so joy and sukha. Same words that were used for steps 5 and 6 then are really important ingredients for the deeper concentration. So we have vitaka, vichara, piti, joy, sukha, that ease of the heart, that pleasure of the heart, ekagata, which is unification. So there's nothing left in the space of the mind to fragment it or divide it, which could only be some subtle element of a doer doing something. All of that's been abandoned, and so the mind experiences the mind free of that fragmentation. So we call it unification. And that's a temporary liberation of the mind. We can get it more easily in a good metta session, whether you're walking, right? It doesn't have to be in sitting, but when you have boundless love, that mind is also temporarily liberated from selfing and negativity. Now this comes with a lot more mental stillness. It's more profound, but it's still temporary. It's like there are still latent tendencies to take things personally and to want to get revenge, and but it's a very powerful experience to have. And even anything in that direction is very useful, right? Any movement toward a mind with less, as opposed to more, less self-centered activity, let's call it. And the key is like this, recognizing the space, not the activity, right? That's that first step there, step 9, right? It's like taking the attention once and for all away from the activity of the body and the mind, and we're just keeping the space. Like, it would be a little fun exercise, like for 30 seconds or whatever, can we just intuit the space of the room without getting fixed on what's happening here? And what makes it hard is it's subtle and it's not our habit. But it can be, which is why we have the training. And remember, even if you feel like, God, I'm just can't even connect with my breath, forget the third tetrad, they're kind of like, I think I mentioned maybe last week even, think of it as a curriculum. And yeah, it really helps to be really competent at the first tetrad. It's very supportive to learning how to be really competent at the second tetrad. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't practice all three or all four, because we'll move on to the fourth in another week. Because there are things that we'll learn that will actually help us in the earlier tetrads. Like really having confidence in that the mind isn't defined by its self-centered tendencies. It really helps us when we're having a big judgment fit because we can't sustain attention with the breath. Because I want to worry about this or think about that. Because then when we catch that self-centered activity getting in the way of tracking the breath, we just have more confidence that that's not me. It's a hindrance. It's a defilement. It's whatever it is. It's just that. It's just that habit manifesting like this. And so it makes it much easier to persist and to begin again and have a more kind but fearless relationship to these distractions that keep showing up for us. Oh yeah, that's just that. So we'll have our small groups tonight, and I wanted to share this. I don't think I did last week. I meant to, but this passage from Ajahn Sumedho's book, Anapanasati. Stop me, some wave if I did read this. But this is the chapter on Anapanasati in that booklet. I think it's Now is the Knowing is the name of the book. The more we take the easy way, the path of least resistance, the more we just follow our desires, the more the mind becomes sloppy, heedless, and confused. It's easy to think, easier to sit and think all the time than not to think. It is a habit we've acquired. Even the thought, I should not think, is just another thought. To avoid thought, we have to be mindful of it. To put forth effort by watching and listening, by being attentive to the flow of our minds. See, this is really step 7, observing the flow of the minds. And I talked about that last week, right? Where it's like one trains oneself breathing in, experiencing mental formations, I think is how Gil Fronsdal translates it. Yeah, experiencing mental formations. A lot of people say it has mostly to do with the feeling tone, because that's really the triggering element in terms of mental activity. And remember, the feeling tone, the pleasantness, unpleasantness, and neutrality of any experience, mental or physical, we might think of that as being visceral, the feeling tone, like the unpleasantness of a memory, because it does seem to have a visceral, embodied quality to it. But it's really a mental event, a mental happening, the feeling tone. So when we're observing the mind, observing the activity of the mind, I should say, what's really relevant is the pleasantness, unpleasantness, and neutrality of that flow. And then not needing to be confused by the flavor, the affective flavor of mental activity. And it's a real shift, that ability, as Ajahn Sumedho says here, to avoid thought, we have to be mindful of it. To put forth effort by watching and listening, by being attentive to the flow of our minds. Rather than thinking about our mind, we watch it. Rather than just getting caught in thoughts, we keep recognizing them. Thought is a movement, right? And that's the key, is to observe thought as a phenomena, as a flow, as a process, not me thinking a thought. So it's a real shift in view. And it's that, to whatever degree we could rest in that pleasure of the mind, that ease of the heart, that really gives the heart the fortitude. Like part of that I mentioned in the guided sit, part of the experience of that sukha, this is the initial level of sukha, step 6, and then we get a more profound dose of it with step, I guess it would be 10. But it has that sense of viscerally being held, like, I don't want to go anywhere. I don't want to move. Don't need to become anyone. It really has that sense of being held. And then from that place, then thoughts can be observed. Like, it's not me thinking in order to get something or get away from something or plan something or become somebody. It's just the force of habit. So we really have this wonderful capacity to have a different relationship to mental activity. But remember, everything is cause and effect. What is the supportive cause to be able to have that new relationship with mental activity? It's feeling really good. Feeling really good. And the safety and the settledness that comes from that. And in that sense, there really is a kind of a building or a cumulative building of competence, spiritual competence, with these 16 steps. Thought is a movement, it is energy, it comes and goes, it is not a permanent condition of the mind. Without evaluating or analyzing, when we simply recognize thought as thought, it begins to slow down and stop. That's step 8. This isn't annihilation, this is allowing things to cease. It is compassion. As the habitual obsessive thinking begins to fade, great space we never knew were there, great spaces we never knew were there begin to appear. Right? So that's that transition from step 8 to step 9, where we really sense the space of the mind. We gladden it. We really attune to the pleasure of aligning, of abiding with the space, and sense the stillness, the emptiness of it, the profound stillness of it. We have to keep that in mind. And the more we attune to that stillness, the more any claim, any self-centered ownership, all of it is just seen as extra. So that shutting is really a natural thing. It isn't the result of somebody making a skillful Dharma move there to kind of initiate a deep state of meditative absorption, which is always what we think. It's like, I just need to know, I need the right key to unlock it, this deep state of meditation. And then I'll have that attainment. It will be mine, that deep state of meditation. And now, once I have that key. But it's really, all of it is just a lawful process. So when in doubt, train yourself to relate to the instructions in that way. It's a mapping a lawful process, an impersonal lawful process. So the liberation of the mind is something that just happens. So I thought with the small groups tonight, we could really focus on on the lawfulness. So let me just review. Like when we're tracking the breath with steps 1 and 2, right? The instruction is to track the breathing in and the breathing out, just the physicality, the natural bodily process of breathing in and breathing out, but tracking it with enough discernment, enough stability of present moment awareness to discern if it's a grosser or a more refined breath. And so when we track a gross breathing process with enough persistence, enough patience, enough kindness, then it will become a more refined breath. And we can build our own confidence in that cause and effect. The breath becomes refined not because we want it to become refined. It becomes refined because the mind is tracking the breath without forcing anything, without being aversive or controlling. And that leads to the refinement, because seclusion, it's like it's the law. When the mind drops its other habits, like of being controlling, for example, then things settle down. And that we directly, immediately experience. Oh yeah, this is the law. This is how it is. That's wisdom discerning cause and effect. And the same thing, like when we practice that inclusive, step number 3, inclusive awareness, then the Buddha is saying it's the law that when you're with the body in this inclusive way, not staring at the places that hurt in your body, but just taking it all in. You all belong. Everything. It all belongs. Yes, yes, yes. Then there's a healing will happen, and the natural expression or effective feeling of that healing is bodily calm, bodily well-being. And it will spread and deepen, widen. It will feel good in the body. Even when, we're mostly sitting with pain, when that's developed wisely, we're free from bodily pain. We're removed from bodily pain. Doesn't mean that whatever tendon is out of place in the knee or whatever inflamed tendon we might have, it's not like the inflammation has gone away, but the mind is really attuned to its relationship with the body, which is beautiful. So the experience we're experiencing is the beauty, the wholesomeness of the mind that's knowing the body, not the inflamed tendon or the, whatever it might be, the headache that may or may not be there. And of course, that healing of the mind knowing the body can have real effects physically in the body if the tension, the inflammation, or whatever is somehow being caused or perpetuated by some mental state. When that mental state goes away, then the physical tension some physical tension really does go away. And other more chronic issues don't. And then, same things, then we bring joy to mind, we establish joy, and then when we step back from joy, so we're not dependent on the joy, not immersed in the joy, just knowing there is joy being known, then it just creates this cause for a healing in our heart, a contentment like, oh yeah, I don't have to go anywhere. It's a real dropping of a chunk of that chronic, incessant thinking there's somebody who's got to do something. And that's what ease is. That sukha, that pleasure of the heart, is a dropping of a sense of me needing to do, me needing to become. It's who we are just in that kind of personality sense is really characterized by our identification with craving. We're so confidently identified with craving. And in that experience of ease, that's taking a real hit, the identification with craving. I think I'll just rest in this ease. We're not even at the place where I'm uprooting the habit of craving. It's just like, right now, I'm feeling really good. I'm just going to rest here. And we watch the thoughts. That leads cause and effect to quietude. We observe the space. We observe the pleasure of the space, empty space, the stillness. That leads to a natural shedding. The effect is the natural shedding of any selfing, anything extra in the mind. So the releasing or liberating of the mind. And same cause and effect with the fourth tetrad that we'll get to. We'll come back to this next week. But in the small groups, you could just talk about cause and effect. Anywhere you notice cause and effect, you applied yourself as best you could with the instructions. You did your best to follow instructions. What natural effect? It's like little mini testimonials to your small group. Oh, there is cause and effect. It's a law, meditation follows a lawful, dependable truth. We can bank on it. If the mind follows the instructions a little bit, we get a little results. If we follow it a lot, we get a lot of results. If the mind is completely all in, then we really master that cause and effect. No, that doesn't mean we can always do that, because there are different forces at play in our mind, like doubt, for example. But when we have doubt, just come back to the instructions. So sharing some of that struggle and application of your mind and some results can be really useful in the small groups. And remember, they're little sacred gatherings of 3 and 4 of you. Say your name, share your pronouns if you want. Remember the confidentiality of the group. Decide the order. Find someone to time. Each person gets at least 2 minutes or thereabouts. Even if some of that is in silence, we just hold that space in a relaxed way. Then the next, till each of the 3 or 4 people have had a turn. Then 5 or so minutes of just open discussion. Great. So I'm going to shut off the live stream.